Welcome to Kev's Travel Stories. Each week I'll be bringing you a story from the weird and wonderful world of travel, a world that can change the way you see life and love and even the way we find meaning. Places that are iconic and sometimes surprising and even terrifying. So sit back and enjoy while we go on a magical mystery tour together. Welcome to Kevin's Travel Stories, and this week there's a very poignant story because I'm talking about a very personal miracle that happened when I was visiting Rome with my mother. My mother had always said she did not want to visit Rome because, in her own words, "If I see Rome, I'll die." This phrase bemused us, but as she got older and was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I knew deep inside that I needed to take her to Rome. So I organised a trip with my sister Anne, and we flew out with my mum, and we arrived at this extraordinary hotel, which is right in the heart of St. Peter's Square, Pope Paul VI. It's used a lot by clergy, and it has access from the balcony, which has a bar, where you can sip Prosecco. You can look right into St. Peter's and Michelangelo's dome, and right across at the Pope's private residence. So there we were on the first night, sipping our Prosecco and really looking at the wonder of Rome on a balmy spring evening. My mum didn't travel well. I think she was a bit stressed that first night, and though the Alzheimer's was not very advanced, she still had these moments when she slipped into non-lucidity, she repeated herself, and we knew she was sort of drifting. But we were excited because I could see a slight pep in her step, actually being in the holy city of Rome, one of the great destinations in the world. And as I sat there, I thought, well, tomorrow is going to be an adventure. She's actually going to step into St. Peter's, the Holy of Holies, if you're a Catholic or a Christian. But when the next morning dawned, I got a terrible shock. I'd walked my mother right next to the square, and we were beside the entrance where the clergy went into on the left flank of the front of St. Peter's, this extraordinary Michelangelo columns and temple-like facade, very imposing. But we had to travel to the other side to get in, and there was a queue half a mile long. It wasn't moving very fast. The temperature had hit around about 28, and I turned around to see my ma, who'd sat on a wall, looking so frail and so diminished, and I knew I couldn't leave her there, but she could not queue for the couple of hours it looked like it was taking, nor could she walk the mile or so that would be required to get into St. Paul's. So I did something I very rarely do. I went into the main office, and I pulled out my press pass, and I actually used my influence as a press journalist and editor to get us in. I said I was writing about the access old people have to St. Peter's, and it wasn't looking good for my ma, and the message worked, which was strange because in Italy they sometimes don't necessarily respond to that sort of approach. But a Swiss guard came. I remember he was very young, very tall, very handsome, dressed in his ceremonial gear, and he escorted us to the very place where the other priests and dignitaries were allowed to walk in. And that was the first part of the miracle, that we jumped a mile-long queue and 2 hours in the sweltering sun, and we walked into St. Peter's. But the miracle was only building up, as I discovered, because what happened next was one of the stewards approached us, and he said, in faltering English, being an Italian, "Is your mama okay?" And so began a fantastic relationship with Beppe, who was one of the senior stewards in the Vatican, the men that were responsible for checking that people weren't being too noisy or too disrespectful from other worshippers. And he saw my mum, and I explained the circumstances. I explained about her condition and her frailty, and he just put his fingers to his lips and he said, "Leave it with me, Mr. Kevin." And so we were taken down to the first place she wanted to visit, a huge queue going to see the recently deceased John Paul II, the Polish Pope. The majesty of what Beppe did, he took us, she didn't have to queue, we went straight down, and she knelt by the tomb of John Paul II and said a prayer. Then he whisked us to the very top of Michelangelo's dome in a private lift. Again, huge queues avoided. What a miracle this was turning out to be. And finally, my mum held my arm as we walked up towards the Baldacchino, this extraordinary masterpiece, which is where the altar of St. Peter's is. And she clasped me in tight. And I looked at her face. And it moves me as I think about it now, because she just said, "I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I'm here." And big tears rolled down her eyes. And at that moment, I knew I had done the right thing, listened to the voice, and I was happy. Well, my mum wanted to go to the papal mass, and Beppe organised that as well. Huge queues for the papal mass. And we got in the side entrance. We were taken right to the front row and sat there. The rest of the trip was poignant. We visited the Forum, we took her to the place where Fellini used to have his cocktails and had a cocktail with her. And you know what happened? My mum suddenly flourished like a flower in the desert. Her memory came back. Her face changed. Her whole physiognomy, her whole body language came back to life. And she was almost young again, and it was deeply moving, and I knew something quite extraordinary had happened. But the real miracle happened 6 weeks later, because the prophecy that my mum had always believed in came to pass. One night, she fell. She hit her head, had a catastrophic head injury, lay in hospital in the intensive care unit, and 10 days later, we had to give permission for her to pass on. And that was very tough, because they don't allow you to end the suffering. You have to suffer till you take your last breath. And another little miracle occurred there, because we had all left. After 10 days, we were exhausted. We knew the end was near. And as I approached the lift in the ICU in Dublin, a little voice came and said, "Take that little medal and put it under a pillow, because she may not be here in the morning." And when I came back with my son Kieran, all the alarms were ringing by her bed and emergency staff were there. She had waited for us to leave in order to die. So we had the privilege of being by my mum's bed and putting our hands on her and saying, "Mum, you can go." And it was after that I went up on the roof with my sister, and it was almost like I could feel her spirit pass. And there was a peace there, and the peace was there because of what had happened in Rome, what had happened in St. Peter's, that miraculous morning, that Saturday morning when the long queues and the heat seemed obstacles we could not overcome. But then the miracle happened, and she found her youth again, she found her vitality, and she lived life right to the full for that one last miraculous moment. And for that I will ever thank St. Peter's and Rome and Beppe. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with one friend. I want to share what travel has done for me. It's improved my life and given me a sense of meaning, and I'd like to share that with you. Thank you for listening to this podcast on my miracle in Rome.